Welcome to Agora Insights. My name is Deirdre Karen, for those who don't know. And today we're going to be talking about the Business Analyst to Business Architect course, but I'm going to just talk about the role first. And what does this mean? And what are the things that you could consider in this role? So what are we going to be covering today? Firstly, we're going to talk about being the conduit of information. So as business analysts, we are the conduit of information, and so are business architects, actually. We are taking information from one state to the other. So we'll be talking about what that means. We'll be looking at what is the role of a business analyst versus a business architect. We'll also look at what do business analysts do in very simple terms, and then we'll look at what do business architects do. And then we'll bring in some tools and libraries, and then we're going to open up with a Q&A session to allow you to understand the role a little bit better and understand the transition. So let's just first talk about depth. When we work as business analysts, we often have to do requirements and we have to discover what we need to deliver within our project. And I will talk about the knowledge brief in a bit, but we really have to deep dive into what is required for a change and how that links with the particular area that we are working within. However, when we look at architecture, we have a bit of a different picture. Here we're looking at a bird's eye view of the organization. We're looking at how the organization functions, what are the patterns, what are the roadmaps, how do they relate to each other. An important component with business architecture is that we're looking at what I would call the breadth. And so when I spoke about the business analyst, we talk about the depth, we talk about how many layers you've got to go into in order to get the requirements for the business. But when you are looking at the business from an architectural point of view, you are looking at the breadth. And so the breadth is really something where we look at how do we take our strategy, our objectives of our organization, and how do we build this picture of what do we see happening? And this is why strategy is so important. We look at how the strategy of the organization is structured, and then we determine the breadth in terms of architecture. And then business analysts typically go down into that level of detail of what's required to reach that future state. Now, I say that, and in a perfect world, this is how it would all work. But sometimes we work in between. So sometimes the business architect is doing a little bit of depth as well, because part of what business architects do is also analysis. But the depth, what I refer to when I discuss depth, is that depth is around how much information is required, and breadth is around how broad the information is that we need to capture. So as business analysts and business architects, we both perform a very similar function where we, as I mentioned, are the conduits of information. So we know that in our organization, we start with data, and data is around gathering the parts. And so we would look at recording data, absorbing data. And then when we go into our information layer, we look at connecting these parts. So we've got information or data that we've collected. And this can be through various means. This could be user stories that you've captured. This could be your documents that have been reviewed. And then we look at putting this into some kind of knowledge. So what is the difference between a business analyst and a business architect? And so this is quite important because, as I mentioned, we talk about the breadth and the depth. So business architecture looks at the knowledge base in terms of the key business architecture blueprints and designs based in our knowledge base. So we will try to capture all of the information that's necessary. And this is an important word. Architecture is not about capturing everything. It's about capturing what's needed in the organization, cataloging, categorizing, putting it into some kind of order. And that knowledge base should eventually have some kind of tool, which makes a lot of sense, but it depends on what the organization is using. Business analysts, on the other hand, look at focusing on the information and the knowledge required for a particular change. So not a change in the sense that it needs to affect the whole organization. No, rather we look at a particular change that is required within an organization. So this will typically mean we have a project or we have a particular initiative that we are providing information and knowledge for. So overall, both business architects and business analysts are gathering information. They're putting information together to form knowledge, and they are providing this information to organizations so that they can make good decisions. And that's really the goal. So we hope they make good decisions. Architecture point of view, and I just want to remind you of that breadth and depth picture. As a business analyst, we're going down into the depth of the knowledge that's required in order to create a change. Whereas in business architecture, we are having that bird's eye view of the organization to categorize, succinct, put it all together. So if we look at the difference between what business analysts and what business architects do, I want to remind all analysts that you're in business to analyze. Sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we talk about business analysis as the document catcher of requirements, which is not, it's not what you're meant to do. Now, business architects also analyze. So there is a really close connection, but what business analysts do is they really look at gathering all the parts. They look at putting these parts together. That could be through user stories, interviews, workshops, etc., on a particular change initiative. And so I use the example here. If this person is a business analyst on the left-hand side, she's focusing on gathering information. And this information is then going to be converted into requirements at some point. And I use the term investigative journalist to describe what business analysts do. On the other hand, you've got your architecture, which really is about cataloging, collecting, collating, analyzing what information you have within your organization and what decisions you're going to be making. So we have a knowledge base, which is where we store all of our information as business architects. And then as business analysts, we have what I call the knowledge brief, which is to take a component of the knowledge base and analyze it. So let's look at the 10 things that business analysts do. And people can argue with me, that's all right, but right now, this is what I'm going to be explaining. So when a change occurs, analysts essentially look at what is the change, what is the background of the problem. So we need to dig into finding out why we need to change as an organization. And there could be many reasons. It could be just an improvement. It could be digital transformation. It could just be enhancements. But this is usually specific to a project. But it's typically a piece of work that needs to be done. And we would analyze what the strategy is for this project. We would write a background statement. We would discover what the problem statement is. We'd look at critical success factors to measure what success would look like in the future. And we'd do a root cause analysis. Once we've done that, we would then be working with our stakeholders. We'd review the current state of the organization. We would do our business requirements. We'd look at our future states, our cost to benefits ratio from what we're changing, and then we'd make recommendations. So this is what business analysts are typically doing in projects. So this picture I showed you in the very beginning. And so as business analysts, we have our 10 key activities that we do. Now, if we're looking at business architecture, and this is the kind of knowledge base, we model things and we put things into some kind of coherent pattern. We look at strategy, we interpret strategy, we model things, and then we look after our knowledge base. Those are some things that we do. And these are the things that we model. So we look at our capabilities, probably the most important thing for any business architect to know about. And these are our building blocks in our organization. This is what we do. Then we look at value streams, and value streams is why we do it. Why are we doing it? What is that value that we provide in? Then we look at organization, who is involved, and we look at organization broadly. We don't look at organization as a single person, like a business unit. We look at it beyond the actual organizational chart. We would bring in people like vendors and different service providers. So anybody that helps us fulfill a capability in the organization. In the course, I use the example of McDonald's. McDonald's doesn't only have one org chart, they have many providers that work in and outside to provide the capability that's required for McDonald's to function. And then we look at information concepts, which you can see is closely aligned to data architecture. And information concepts is around the cataloging of the information that we have and how this all comes together. Now, again, I want to take you back to the picture that I showed in the beginning for business architecture. You are creating a pattern and a plan of what the organization does as a whole. You're not looking at the depth of a project. You're looking at how that project will impact the organization. So the depth and breadth is a key component when we discuss what business architects do. Somebody who understands the breadth is somebody who's a big picture thinker. And so I always say, the BA, you need to understand if you're a big picture thinker. That's the most important thing when you're doing any type of architecture or enterprise architecture. And then having some design skills is probably really helpful as well, because the difference between a BA and a BArch is probably the ability to design the organization, which you don't really need to do with requirements. You would do processes probably, which is a design component. But I think systems design is a little bit more complex. So how would you bring these two together? And in this course, the reason why I structured this course, and this is really important, is in your BABARC guide, there's a chapter 11, which discusses the role of a business analyst playing business architecture. And I've played both roles before. And I absolutely can see the value of having a good architecture if you're doing a project. Can you imagine a whole bunch of BAs deep diving into all of these projects, trying to fix problems in certain areas without having a big picture view? It doesn't make any sense. And it means we're going to have waste of work, waste of time, waste of resource, and we're probably not going to reach the objectives that we want. And that's the reality. And so for BAs who've worked in projects for a long time, who go, oh, but we did something like this in another project, this is probably due to the fact that we have this misalignment between the depth of work that we're doing in an organization, the strategy that's required, and how that all links to the initiative. So if we looked at what architects are doing, they're creating the big picture view. And initially, architects would look at analyzing the strategy and working on the blueprints associated with aligning the strategy for the organization. What business analysts do is they analyze the strategy to ensure that the change that's needed is in line with what's required. And in business architecture, we talk about initiatives. So an initiative is not the same as a project. A project is about budget, time, money, management, etc. We talk about initiative It's about the changes that occur to our capabilities. And so there is a slight difference, but I won't go into the detail. I do you do in the course. And so what we do as business analysts, our lives would be so much simpler if we could have the depth of information that business architecture can provide in our projects. But as a BA, and this is where you're almost working between the two roles, as a business analyst, you can start bringing in architecture into your work too, which is exceptionally helpful because anyone who's captured requirements before will know how long it takes to capture requirements. It's scary. You're interviewing hundreds of people and asking questions and going a bit in loops when it comes to projects. Whereas with a good architecture in place, you actually can gather that information. Remember, we're the conduits of information from your architectural knowledge base, and you can pull that information together. So that's the benefits of having a good, solid architecture and a good, solid analyst who's going to look at strategy and look at what we're doing and use the knowledge base, use the information we have from architecture to derive requirements and solutions. And remember, business analysts analyze what business needs in order to make change. So if you transition into the role of a business architect, some of the key things you do need to know is that you need to understand how architecture fits into our projects. And I always say to BAs who are transitioning, take off your BA hat, because you've been taught about processes, you've been taught about how projects run, you've been taught about how all these things are structured, and put on your business architecture hats and think like an architect, think big picture, and then take your knowledge, your experience from how projects are working to really help you construct your architecture. As I mentioned in the beginning, the strategy to modeling, we have several techniques that we use in both business analysis and business architecture. There's one that isn't really being used in business analysis, which is the Hush and Cunray, which is probably the best technique you can use as a business architect and analyst, because it's around deployment and it's around functional decomposition of deployment at multiple levels. As we are working, let's say, in the breadth as a business architect, we look at the strategy and we use several techniques and tools in order to really understand what the business wants to achieve, what their overall goals are, and how it would be structured. When we work on strategy analysis as a business analyst, we take a pool of information that we've derived from the business, and we analyze how that change is going to affect the organization, that particular change. And so we use very similar techniques, but it's the depth and breadth at what we're working on. The role, just like a business analyst, you don't need to have all these amazing technical tools to be able to be a BR. What you're doing is you are managing information. It is good to be able to, at least at a minimum, use simple things like Lucidchart, Excel spreadsheets, where you can actually just show the different capabilities and show the different information. So if you can do a process diagram, you can do business architecture. There are enterprise tools that you can use, but you don't have to necessarily use them. They're helpful, but you don't have to. I see there's a question from James. When you mention big picture thinker, can this be developed, or is it a natural trait? I'm almost nervous to answer your question. You need to be able to see a big picture. So if you can look at a diagram of a house, and you can look at a blueprint of a house, and you can see where the kitchen is, and you can see where the bathroom is, and you have an idea of how that all fits together, then you are essentially a systems thinker, because you now have this view of how this works. Now, it's going to be quite hard for me to give you a direct answer whether you will be able to do it, versus the general answer. But typically, big picture thinking, let me just see what Andre says here. I would use house building example, believe that there is a test. If you're a big picture thinker as a business analyst, if you can picture in your head what you're putting together in your pieces, then you're a big picture thinker. Yeah, so similar to where I was leaning with this. If you can see what's going to come out of it when you look at a house plan, that is the kind of skill that you need as a business architect. You need to be able to put all the pieces together and say, this is how it's going to work. I think that you can learn many things. So I don't think that it always means that you have to automatically be able to go and read maps and do maps, but you do need to be able to, when you think, pull a whole lot of maybe what may be perceived as unrelated events together to see how those relationships work. So in a building example, you've got a plumber, you've got an electrician, you've got a designer, you've got an interior consultant, your landscape. And as an architect, you would have to design it for all of those roles and all of those needs. They would go into the detail around how that, let's say, the fridge is going to be working, etc., or the plumbing is going to be working. But an architect would look at the full picture and give an overarching design. Thanks for helping with that answer. And James, I'm glad. Give it a go. I say this with most things. I like to just caution people, but I also want to say, if you want to just try it, you can't get any harm from learning. Everything is about learning. Thanks for sharing, Andre. And I do mention this in the free preview of the course, is that 60% of business architects used to be business analysts. And as a business architect, you'll still be analyzing. You just won't be analyzing down to the requirements level. You'll still be analyzing what is the business needing, what are they wanting, how it all comes together. So that's where the two really do work hand in hand. So I think it's a real advantage for a business analyst to become a business architect. I also think that with your business architecture, because you have capabilities, this is what we call the building blocks, what we do, and we don't repeat them. A capability is a capability. Customer management is a capability, doesn't matter what business unit you're working in. It's quite a mind shift for BAs who've worked with processes for many years, who think of all the different processes and want to put them together. Architecture gets rid of all of that initially, in the beginning, just to focus on the capabilities. So then when we know what we're doing as an organization, it makes it so much easier for us to manage change, because then we can say, what are we changing? So James said, I'm really pleased as the session reinforces what I have come to broadly understand about the role. Love the idea. The investment decisions are aligned with the blueprints. And so, yeah, makes so much sense. So I hope you understand the difference between a business analyst and a business architect, and look at ways in which you might be shifting to that role. If there are no other questions, I'm going to probably just close up. But what I do want to say is that there are free previews and free resources available. So thanks for joining us today.